Due to the graphic nature of the personal accounts and content discussed in this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Many episodes will include graphic personal accounts and discussions of child sexual assault, domestic violence, physical abuse, rape, sexual situations, and suicide.
Oh my child, I know you're hurt and you can't let go. It's not your fault and you don't deserve all the bad and the hurt. I know you tried so hard. I know you've done your part. It's not fair. You did your time. How much longer will you suffer in this life? But don't give up. Just hold on tight. It'll be alright.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Latter-day Survivors. I'm Christina. I will be hosting this episode today. And we've got with us today, our guest today is Denise. And Denise is someone that reached out to us via our website and submitted a submission to tell her story. Denise is someone that has had a lot of trauma go on in her life. She was a victim of child sexual abuse as a child and has since then suffered multiple losses, including the loss of her religion. And she's ready to tell her story and heal. So welcome, Denise, to Latter-day Survivors.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Absolutely.
Honestly, I thought I would go my entire life without ever having to deal with this or address it or even think about it again. I almost made it. I went about 58 years without having to face it or admit that it's been affecting me. It caught up with me in a very big way. I'll probably get to that afterwards.
Sure.
But yeah, and I just wanted to start. I wanted to state my reasons for wanting to do this. First of all, if I know you do, you have listeners, or if anybody comes across this, it's a feeling of, it's just nice to know you're not alone. I know when I discovered your podcast quite a while back, there were things that I thought were unique to my story, and I found out they weren't.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are kind of going through the same things and have been affected in just a multitude of ways. And also, I think it's important to shine a light on this subject because it's in the dark, it's in the corner, and it's harmful.
Absolutely.
I feel like it's been sort of normalized, and a lot of people maybe wouldn't agree with me on that, but I feel like even, especially within the Mormon religion, it's kind of normalized and kind of accepted as a part of life. But I don't know, not everybody feels that way. It's been my experience. And I just like to encourage prioritizing victims and treatment and not the predator. I think that we prioritize the predator and the predator's whatever.
Yeah.
But the victims, that's the top. That's the very top. That's who we need to be addressing.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And I think that they just, for the most part, are ignored.
Ignored and silenced, right?
and silenced, and not even, not always in oppressive way,
Mm-hmm.
but just as, because it's easier to not talk about it kind of way. And so people think that by just not talking about it, that it will kind of go away on its own, but it doesn't.
As many of us have discovered a little bit later in life, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
just go away, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm still, just for any friends or family that are listening to this, I'm still a little bit in my anger phase about some different things. And so just bear with me. And this is just my story. This is my truth. This is my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I just ask for some empathy and understanding.
Yep.
I'm angry. I'll go into it more. But
Sure.
so I guess I'll start out just real quick on how I came to be. My story starts out with my mom and my dad, my biological dad. My mother had 4 kids, and she was pregnant when my dad died.
Mm.
So I was, and oh goodness, that's a whole big story all on its
Mm-hmm.
own. He was, a director in Hollywood. He was trying to get money to produce the Book of Mormon into a movie. I mean, this was back in the 60s. So
Wow.
anyway, he actually was a treasure hunter, and he died seeking the treasure.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a crazy, bizarre story. But she was pregnant with her 5th. I was second to the oldest, and I had just turned 4.
Oh, wow. She was a busy mom.
So there was a lot of we were a lot of us
Yeah.
little. And so she was widowed. Her family had a meeting and kind of decided what she should do with her life. And she had gone to BYU, and she was just a couple credits short to be able to get a teaching certificate. So they had her go to Berkeley, and she finished up her degree so that she could teach. And to be able to do that, she had to kind of farm us kids out. So she kept me and my older brother. We were the 2 oldest, but then the others she gave away to other families to raise for a few months until she could gather us all back in together as a family. Wow. So she did that. She graduated. She was a school teacher. She taught kindergarten. She bought a little house in Northern California. And so then we were all together in our little house in Northern California. We had a housekeeper from Sweden. Her name was Vicky. So, my mom had some support, but she was beautiful. My mother's just beautiful. And at that time, they had, in the church, they called it special interests, which was adults past a certain age, I guess adults that were single.
Mm-hmm. I'm vaguely remembering this. Like, it's sounding kind of familiar to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not young single adults. It's, once you age out of that. So she was going to some of their dances and things. And that's how she met my stepdad. And he fell madly in love with her basically on sight. And they have a sweet, sweet love story. But so they got married. My mom had 5. My dad had 4. So there were 9 kids at the wedding.
Wow.
And later on, they had 3. So it's a big family of his, hers, and ours of 12 overall. But for the most part, we didn't all live in the same house at the same time because of the age differences. And also because my stepdad is who I'm going to be calling my dad from here on out. He's really the only dad I know. I have no memories of my biological father. Mm-hmm. So from here on out, my dad is my dad, and he was divorced, so he kind of had shared custody with his kids with his ex-wife. Mm. So that's why not everybody was all in the house at the same time. He had 3 older boys, and his youngest was a daughter, and she and I are a month apart. Oh, wow. So we're kind of we were the same age. Mm-hmm. And then So it was stair steps. All his kids are older, and then my mom's kids worked into the ages there. And then anyway, so I was 7 years old when they got married, and these stepbrothers that came into our home, the boys started living with us right away. The youngest daughter that was my age, I'm going to say her name. She's passed away. She died probably 10, 15 years ago from diabetes.
Wow.
So she and I are the same age. She never lived with us.
Okay.
She visited, when my dad would have his weekends and things. And but she never lived with us. But the 3 older boys did, because they were a handful. And I don't know what went on in their life before they came to us, but by the time they came to us, it just wreaked a lot of havoc in our lives. And so that's where a lot of my anger comes right now with my dad and coping, because he just brought this into our lives, and I might swear sometimes. It kind of effed us all up.
Yeah.
So 7 years old, and one time when Sherry was visiting us, and we all had to cram into this tiny little 3-bedroom house that my mom had bought all on her own.
Oh, wow.
As a kindergarten teacher. So when they got married, my dad moved in to her house and brought the boys. So we had rearranging of rooms, and I don't know how we all fit in, but there were bunk beds, or it's so fuzzy. My brother, the oldest stepbrother, had a room, and we didn't really have a TV too much. So the oldest brother had a TV in his room, and so it was a real treat to be able to watch TV. And one night, me and Sherry were in. He was letting us watch TV, and that's when I found out that Sherry was really used to doing this, but he would have her lay on her back, and then he kind of would like get on top of her, and he was trying to hover as much as possible, but it was like a dry hump. And she showed me that that's what he likes, and then traded places. And so I laid down, and I can remember laying on my back and then just turning my head to the side and just looking at the TV, and my brain just went into the TV, and he did whatever he was doing on top of me, and I had no idea what was going on. But I instinctively knew that it was secret, and odd, wrong somehow.
Yeah.
I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what was going on.
Can I ask how old he was? What the age difference was between you and him?
He was 15.
Oh, he was quite a bit older. Okay. Okay.
And that happened a few more times, but he wasn't my main abuser.
Wow.
So that was when I was 7 and 8 and during those years. And what's interesting, when I turned 8 in July, my sister Sherry Kay turned 8 in August, and then he turned 16 in September. And so they had us wait and get baptized after he turned 16 so that he could baptize Sherry Kay, because he would be old enough in the Mormon religion to be a priest, and the priest can baptize.
Right.
So my dad confirmed us both, but Gordon baptized her. And I mean, it all seemed very normal to me.
Yeah.
Also, these brothers were, they teased us mercilessly. They they there was a lot of they were on drugs. They started drugs at a very young age. They got
Wow.
my 9-year-old brother on drugs so that he wouldn't tell on them. His life was basically fucked up from there on.
Yeah.
He also, anyway, I can remember one time they had my little brother Rustin, and they were teasing him so bad, and he was crying and crying. And these 3 older boys they had him like in a beach towel, and they kind of rolled him up like a long ways, like a burrito, and then one would hold each end, and they would swing him like a jump rope, and he was just screaming and terrified and crying. And and I watched this, and he was just screaming for help, and I couldn't help him. And it was just, when you're little, it's just such a powerless feeling.
Yes.
Anyway, about a week and a half after I turned 8, these stepbrothers, they had built a fort in our backyard. And so if you can picture the side of your house and how there's a fence that divides the front yard from the backyard, and then there's the side fence that divides your yard from the neighbor's yard, and it has that little side yard there.
Mm-hmm.
So they added a little roof and a wall, and they made a fort. And you had to kind of crawl through maybe 3 or 4 sawhorses to even get into it. And it was their clubhouse, and we weren't allowed to go in there. That's where they would smoke their pot. But so they had all that paraphernalia in there. And one day, my parents were going out on a date. They went to a play in San Francisco, and my stepbrothers went to Mutual, and us 5 little kids, we had a babysitter. And oh my goodness, we would terrorize the babysitter. We were just feral little children. We were just, with everybody working and gone all the time. I learned early on, we just kind of had to fend for ourselves. And anyway, I had concocted this crazy dream, that I was going to do. I was sitting on my front porch, and I was thinking, I'm going to climb in my mom's window. I'm going to put her coat on, and I'm going to get a stool, and I'm going to stand out front and pretend I was my mom home from the day, that would fool the babysitter. So I was coming up with this big plan to play this trick on this babysitter, and then I could hear this screaming. So I ran around to the side of the house, and that fort was on fire.
Oh my heavens.
And my little brother Rustin, who was just under me in age, so he was 6, he was in there, and he had been playing with their matches that the stepbrothers left in there, and it started on fire. I could hear him screaming, and I yelled back to him, "I'm coming, Rustin. We're helping you, Rustin." And I ran in, and I told the babysitter the fort was on fire, and he called, back then you dialed 0, he called the fire department, which it's amazing that he looked right at me and believed me and picked it up. And we had a boy babysitter. And then the fire department came, and me and, while they were on their way, me and my brother that's just older than me, my biological brother, we ran to the neighbors and were knocking on the doors asking for help. And I can remember just hugging the light pole and watching my neighbors come running from the yards, through the yards. We, since we were bratty little kids, we played in the water all the time. So my parents had taken off the little handles from the hose bibs.
Oh man.
And but I knew where it was. I ran in the kitchen, and it was on the windowsill, but I was just little, So by that time, the neighbors had hoses, and then the fire department came, but I held that little handle, and I still had it in my hand the next day. But anyway, we sat in our neighbor's car and watched the fire and watched them put it out. And then somehow we were swooped up and taken to a ward member's house, and we spent the night there. And I remember waking up in the morning, and I and walking through the hallway, and I glanced into the master bedroom, and my parents were in there in bed, and I can remember seeing my mom's face, and it was just covered with mascara. She'd been crying, and I didn't know it, but they told us later that Rustin died in that fire.
Oh, Denise.
Yeah.
Oh,
it was
I'm so sorry.
It was so hard. It was so hard. And he was such a sweet little boy.
Oh.
So anyway, life goes on. My mom and dad bought a lot in the same town where we lived in Northern California, but they needed a bigger house, so they bought a lot and they built a house. And my dad and the brothers were able to do a lot of work on it as well, because he's just really good that way. He's so good at construction. But we moved up to a bigger house up on a hill. And that's about when the third oldest stepbrother, I'm going to say his name, because I mean he can rot in hell as far as I'm concerned. His name was Randy, and he was actually the funnest one out of the brothers. He had the funnest personality. He wasn't quite as mean. He was still a big tease, don't get me wrong, but
yeah,
he just had more of a personality. And he started sexually molesting me. And at first I would be like asleep, and he would come in and, and touch me in places. And then I would stay pretending to be asleep. And I didn't know what was going on, but I still knew it was supposed to be a secret. Of my biological family, the 5 of us, there were 3 boys and 2 girls. So it was boy, girl, girl, boy, 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 or boy, boy. And Rustin died, so then there was 4 of us. And I apologize because this is her story, but
that's okay.
I think that I know that my sister was being abused as well. And so somehow my parents got wind that this might be going on, and there was a night they questioned us, and they asked specifically, and I had the opportunity to tell, and I didn't tell. There was something about it I couldn't bring myself to tell. I learned early on to be the nice guy, to people please, to want to make everybody happy. I felt like I was there to meet others' needs. I don't know how I learned that, other than just all those different things combining. I couldn't. It was stuck in my throat. I couldn't tell. And they brought us in a couple times to make sure, and I still didn't tell, but I think maybe my sister did. But anyway, nothing really happened after that.
Can I interject for a minute?
Yes.
I just want you to, and you may know this, I'm sure you know this, and so you probably don't need me to say this, but I just want to honor the fact that kids are put in an impossible situation. And we so often look back and we think, I could have told and I didn't tell. I could have said something and I didn't say anything, because our bodies silence us because we have to survive. It's a survival mechanism. And so that's a normal response for a child. They instinctively know that if I tell, things might get worse. If I tell, I might get in trouble. They might blame me, or I might have some responsibility. And kids are at the kids, your whole life as a child is dependent on your caregivers and dependent on the people around you. We're silenced as children because we have to survive. I just want to acknowledge that in some ways I've come to understand that I think it's a really actually a good thing that our bodies do that, because we have to get through it, right? We have to survive it. Now, knowing what we know now, we can have these conversations more with kids and we can open things up. But back then, we didn't talk about this stuff. And there was no therapy. It's not like they would have sent you to therapy. And this is not a diss on your parents at all. This is just a product of their time too. It would have been, okay, we'll stop doing that. Okay, everybody go on your merry way. Like if we have a conversation and tell you to stop, it's just going to magically stop. And I think kids know this. They know it. And so they remain silent.
And it's confusing, right? Because your body also, it's being stimulated sexually, and
Yes.
And I don't want it. I didn't invite it, and I don't want it. But there's this also it's stimulated, and
Yep.
so you get those little butterflies or something, and you think,
very
well, so
confusing.
What's wrong with me? It's just so confusing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what's going on.
Absolutely.
So with such a big family, we really didn't ever really take like big vacations like to Disneyland or places like that. But we did every summer drive to Utah to go visit relatives. That was our vacation. And for me, it was like, it was all these great uncles and aunts and people I didn't know. But when we got to see some cousins we liked, that was fun. But
sure.
We had this big long road trip from Northern California to Utah. My dad had a camper shell on the back of his truck. It was just a really basic kind, and it had a long bench on each side and then a place for the table in the middle, and the table could slide out or slide in. So, Tetris with all the kids, it seemed to make logical sense to put the biggest boy with the smallest girl on one side, then the second biggest boy with the second biggest girl on the other side. So that would be me and my brother. And then the others in the middle on the floor. And so, yeah, I was put in the back of the truck. There, we were isolated because it was just a shell on a camper. So it wasn't like we could talk through to the cab.
Right.
Or anything. It was just a shell. And we drive to Utah, and basically my brother would have his hands on me the whole way there, the whole way back. Because it was, it was dark. We drove a lot at night.
Mm-hmm.
And through the worst part, we would drive all night. That was just what you did then.
Right.
And he, like I said, I would pretend to be asleep, but I didn't. So it was pretty invasive.
Yeah.
With him, and there were a couple of summers it was really bad. There was one summer in particular, even during the whole trip there, he would do things, and
yeah,
he would have me like, he would give me like a piggyback ride, but he would like put me on his shoulders, up high against his neck, but he would take my underwear off and put me have his be on his shoulders like that. And I mean, just all kinds of just
yeah.
So with him, it lasted until I was 14.
Wow.
So for those 7 years, between the ages of 7 and 14, I was abused quite a bit. But mostly it was this for years with my Randy. And I know that it was happening to cousins and things too. So it's hard to know that I didn't tell and was happening to others. I mean, you just don't know.
That's not your fault. That's something that so many victims express, that if I had just told, maybe we could have stopped it from happening to somebody else. But you were a child, and that wasn't your responsibility, and you were in survival mode. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to look back through our adult eyes. It's so, because we have such a different understanding through our adult eyes of, oh, so easy, right? If I had just said something, we could have prevented this. It's not, it's a completely different situation when you're a child. That was not your fault.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
So I was living, so I was very insecure in the home. And we would go through a period of time where nothing would happen, and then I would let my guard down. But there was a lot of contention and a lot of yelling in this house. My dad had a horrible temper. It flared up immediately. And we were so Mormon. It's like there's so much contention in the house that my parents are like, okay, well, we need to really buckle down.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, we'd get up at 5:30 for scripture study. And then the boys would go to early morning seminary. And then we'd have family prayer every morning and night. And we'd try to have family home evening every Sunday, which, a lot of times we joked it turned into family fight night,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a common thing with
Yeah.
lots of people, but
I think you're right.
I don't know why we get all stressed out about it, but you get stressed out about having the lesson on time and who's doing it and what are we, we're going to eat and who gets to do that. And by that, everybody's emotions are running high. And by the time it's happening, it never goes perfectly like the mother would just fantasize about.
Right.
We're going to be this happy family. Sometimes it worked out and it was fun, but also it was really kind of chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
And, my dad was in the bishopric, and we were strict. We had to wear our church clothes on Sunday. We couldn't watch TV, listen to bad music. I say bad music. I don't want to call it what my dad called it, but he didn't want to listen to rock music,
right?
Especially on Sundays. They tried to just really to clamp down, but that made the brothers rebel more and worse, and they weren't coping, and I don't know what was going on in their messed up lives. And they would Randy, I mean, everybody knew how to pick the locks, in the house, on the bathrooms and everything. And I found out the only way really to stay safe when I went to the bathroom would be to the way the door opened into the bathroom, there was a drawer right next to it. So if I opened up the drawer, then if somebody picked the lock and opened the door, it would hit the drawer.
Yeah.
And they couldn't get in. There's this one time, though, he was so intent on still getting in that he took a screwdriver and he just poked the drawer and just shoved it.
Oh my gosh.
Back in, and I was in the shower.
Oh.
And we were screaming, and I was trying to fight and push him out of the shower, and it was one of those kind of clear fiberglassy kind of showers. And later on that evening, when no one was in the bathroom, the shower exploded. That glass, that fiberglass went everywhere, and I think it was from the tensions of us fighting with that door and him pushing and me pulling, or me all of that fighting, that it just, as that plastic or whatever it was, fiberglass, relaxed and back to its shape, it just exploded.
Wow.
And it was in every corner of that tiny room. It sounded like a bomb went off. But it was from that. It was from our big fight. And the upstairs bathroom was the same way. He'd come in while I was showering, and I'd scream and wrap the I didn't want to be seen naked,
Right. That's normal. Yeah.
I by this time I was like 10, 11 and 12. And so it was awful. But, I also knew these things were happening to my friends. And one time when I was Beehive, I was in the Beehive presidency, and Beehives are the 12 and 13-year-old girls in the LDS church. The youth group is divided by ages. And so the youngest of the youth group were the beehives, the girls. And I was in the presidency meeting. We would pick a president and counselors, and oh gosh, we walked everywhere. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it was in the 70s. We didn't expect rides anywhere.
Right.
And we would have to walk the longest way. And I think it was probably easily 2 miles that I would walk to my leader's house for presidency meeting. And me and my friend, I walked down the hill to her house, and then we walked to our leader's house, and we went through the school grounds.
Mm-hmm.
And this one day when we were going through the school grounds, there was this group of boys that were our age were there, and we were walking through, and they decided that they wanted to put their hand up my friend's shirt. She was really a fun personality, really flirty, and they decided to just gang up on her.
Wow.
And they didn't bug me because I wasn't, as cute and bubbly as she was, but they all were trying to hold her down and all taking a chance at grabbing her boob. And we were 12, and she was screaming, "Denise, help me, Denise, help me." And I just stood there with my arms crossed. I felt completely powerless.
Mm-hmm.
I felt completely frozen. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. I didn't think I could do anything. I was frozen.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the boys was actually in our church class, so I knew who he was. And but they finally, ran off, and we continued on our way to our presidency meeting, and we told we were crying, and we told our leader about it. And first, I was amazed when I saw the expression on her face. She was shocked. And I thought, oh, wow. She's shocked. That really was wrong what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was just so.
Because everything had been normalized. It's just so
It's
normalized.
so normalized.
Yeah.
It seems like a rite of passage. This is just what happens.
Mm-hmm.
A girl in my 5th grade class told me one time that she was asleep on her couch and she woke up with her stepdad's hand down her pants.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, I know. Don't you hate that they do that? And so this is my worldview. This is how I'm being raised.
Yep.
Is that our men are predators,
Mm-hmm.
basically all men,
Mm-hmm.
and our bodies are objects, and that these boys had needs and you couldn't stop them. That's
Right.
just kind of how I grew up.
Well, and then that kind of, it kind of doesn't stop, right? Because even as we get older, the message, I don't know that it was overtly said, but, and I don't want to speak for you, but I just know so many other people, myself included, where this message then became, when you get married, kind of obey your husband and do things to please him. And it was just kind of like you said, it was just this worldview, like this is what boys and men did, and it's just kind of normal.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll get into that too more, how it affected my marriage.
Yeah.
It was just so. Also in junior high, there was boys that would go around and they would, they'd grab your ass.
Mm-hmm.
There's this one boy in particular that he would just he'd come up behind you and stick his middle finger all the way from behind, all the way up into your vagina, and he did that to every girl in the hallway, just grab.
Wow.
And then just like, we're just like, oh, this is disgusting. Get away from me. I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, I never felt like I had the power to just shut it down,
Mm-hmm.
other than just like, ew, get away from me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's just how I felt like that's how all boys were. So anyway, in my beehive class, I didn't have one. There was like 5 of us girls in Northern California. So the church is at that time, especially, it was very much more spread out.
Yeah.
We considered ourselves living in what's called the mission fields, where it's um, in this huge town. In Arizona, in Utah, there probably would be 16 wards, but this town in California, it had one. And actually, when we first started, we didn't even have a ward in that town. We had to go with adjoining towns, until we were able to have our own ward. And
yeah.
But every girl in this class was sexually abused, and I knew it, and we just all knew it.
Wow.
One of my friends was abused by this family, the dad, when she went camping with them to help them babysit their children.
Wow.
And and that man, he got a talking to, because that one came out and he got a talking to, but
that's as far as it went, huh?
Yeah.
Well,
so it just,
and that reinforces your need to stay silent, right? Because nothing's actually going to happen. Like, nobody's ever going to be held accountable, so we can't speak up either.
It just seemed like that was just like what happens,
Yeah.
You go outside and you get mud on your shoe,
right?
Yeah. It was just, it's like that.
Yeah.
And for me, it kind of, I had this innate subservience. Like, innately, I knew. I knew I was an object, and I had a role. So in the meantime, the fighting with the stepbrothers and my parents, it sucked up all of the oxygen in our home.
Yeah.
And I think the rest of our kids' emotional needs were severely neglected, because these boys were taking everything, all of the oxygen out of the home. And the fight was always on them. If they were always fighting about going to church, fighting about drugs, fighting about school, fighting about just every boundary. And my stepbrother Randy had a girlfriend named Vicky, and of course they started having sex right away. And at one point, the boys ran away from home, and how they did it was my parents were gone, and so they had us go to a ward member's house, and they loaded up my dad's truck and the camper shell with a bunch of our food supply, because we had all the food supply,
right,
the year's supply, food storage, and the guns, and they took off with this truck. And
the boys took off, or your parents took off with it?
The boys did.
The boys did.
They stole the and they got across state lines, and they actually had knocked a window out of the back and had one of their guns poking out the back. And they're just so stupid. And they were caught in Idaho trying to run away from the cops. And so they were brought back, and here's just a broken window. They were just out of control.
Yeah.
And one night after, so by this time I'm in Mutual, and my stepbrother's in Mutual as well. The oldest brother actually ended up going on a mission, and he was kind of gone during this time. And like I said, Randy was the fun one, and we had such a fun time at Mutual that night. I don't know if we were singing or all together. It was just so fun. Our ward was such our family there, because we were so spread out. It was just really close and really tight knit. And we had this great time in Mutual. We came home and we were just on a high and laughing. And he's like, Denise, let's go sleep under the stars. I'm like, okay. And it'd been a minute. It'd been a while since he'd done anything. So I'm like, okay, he's fun and we're okay now. He's leaving me alone. So we got our sleeping bags. We went out in the backyard and we're sleeping outside in the backyard together. And of course, he totally came on very hard. And this time, I'm wide awake. I'm fighting him off and saying, no, 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 no. And he forced himself. And it was just not, it was just awful. It was invasive. And I just, actually, I think I came to tears and I was just begging him to just stop and leave me alone. And I think that finally broke through to him and he said, okay. And he stopped and he said, he wanted to explain something to me. And he told me that he and his girlfriend had been having sex. And he said that she had missed a period.
Oh.
And so they were worried that she was pregnant. And so they confessed to the bishop. And because of that, along with, I think, his drug problems, they were going to have a church court. And he was 17. And so I felt bad for him.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to sleep. And the next morning, though, it was hot as the sun came up. So I went into in the house, in the family room. I was still tired because it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. So I went back to sleep just inside the door of the family room. And he came in and he started attacking me again. And I was trying to get away. And I finally got away and I was crawling as hard as I could across the floor. And I got a really bad rug burn on my knee. And that hurt for a long time. But anyway, not long after that, he was excommunicated.
Wow.
And which is kind of shocking to excommunicate a 17-year-old boy for, and it turned out his girlfriend wasn't pregnant. But I mean, he had sex. So
yeah,
it wouldn't happen in this day and age. They wouldn't excommunicate a boy like that.
Right.
They would disfellowship him. They would do some, they would have consequences for him for sure, but they would kick him out of the church. And the thing is, my dad was the first counselor in the bishopric. I mean, he was part of the group that did this to him.
Right.
And it was very traumatic, actually, for my brother. And he left the family. And he didn't speak to the family for at least 40 years.
Did you say 40?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 30 to 40 years. And shortly after that also. So this was when I was just turned 14. I was 13 when I think I was 14. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We moved to Utah. So he didn't come. In fact, none of the step siblings came. Well, I guess the oldest one did. He was back from his mission. And so he did move with us to Utah, but I basically, those other two stepbrothers, Randy and the other middle one, we didn't hear from them again. And because she's gone, I do want to acknowledge my sister Sherry Kay and the hard life that she had. Obviously, she was being abused. She was old hat by the time I knew her at 7 years old.
Wow.
She was used to all of it.
Yeah.
And she told me when she was 10 that the second to the oldest brother, Robbie, I'm going to say his name, he lived a lot with his real mom. He didn't live with us as much. He was really kind of a tricky kid to have around. And so he lived with his mom and Sherry Kay. And they had a enclosed garage in their backyard that they kind of had as a garden shed or something. There was a cot in there. And anyway, she told me when she was 10 years old that she told me that he raped her, and I didn't know I didn't have that word then.
Yeah.
But she explained that that their wiener got hard or whatever, and I'm like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And whatever she explained to me, I know now that was rape,
Mm-hmm.
and it was often.
Mm.
It was her life.
It was her norm. Yeah.
Yeah. She ended up having moving in with my main abuser, brother Randy, and his girlfriend Vicky, and the three of them were in a relationship together.
Mm.
So Randy and his blood sister,
Mm-hmm.
and his girlfriend. He kind of married his girlfriend, but he took on her last name.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all in an incestual threesome together for quite a while. And
Wow.
she had a very traumatic, disturbing life. Her stepdad traumatized her as well.
And when you say her stepdad, are you talking about Sherry or are you talking about Vicky?
Sherry K.
Sherry K. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My sister. When she was about probably 10 or 11 is when she was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, and that's a big deal.
Yes.
We almost lost her. I mean, she was in the hospital for quite a while. And it was a big, big deal. And she had to learn how to give herself insulin shots. And anyway.
It almost makes me wonder if that happened to her, if that was a trauma response from her body. Yeah, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but it just makes me wonder that, our bodies do some really wild things in the face of trauma. And, it's not super common to get juvenile diabetes. And certainly the abuse didn't help any, for sure.
No.
Yeah.
No, she was very, very traumatized. She had, as an adult, she had an eating disorder for a while. She,
yeah.
The diabetes, it didn't exactly run in our family. I mean, it did on my dad's side when they were older, but
Right.
that's not uncommon.
Right.
For once you in old age, but the juvenile part, yeah.
Yeah.
She also was able to come out later in life as a lesbian, and she was able to have a very happy lesbian relationship.
Good for her.
And eventually her, obviously they weren't married, but
yeah,
they wish they could be. They were together, and her significant other passed away.
Oh my goodness.
So then she was alone again, and anyway, she eventually died from diabetes.
Yeah.
And I don't know that she was taking care of herself.
Yeah.
So she had a very tragic life. And that was I guess she was in her 40s.
Wow. So young.
Yeah. So we moved to Utah, and that was a huge culture shock because we were so used to this happy Ward family. And there's something about, I hate to say it, Utah Mormons, but I didn't know, everybody was Mormon, everybody in my school. And also it was Northern California to a very rural area of Utah. And so it was like cowboys, and I just wasn't used to the ruralness of it. It was like my clock was turned back 10 years. And but I made some good friends. So when we moved to Utah, obviously that was the end of any kind of sexual molestation.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. And I think that if we hadn't moved, we can play the guessing game. I think I might have ended up being more promiscuous, but I was kind of shy. around boys. And I don't know, I don't think I was the cutest thing, but it wasn't a problem in Utah. It was, I didn't have a boyfriend till I was a senior. And but this boyfriend, I did fall madly in love with him. I didn't know it. He didn't know it. He was actually on his way to becoming a full-blown narcissist. But
wow,
by the end of our relationship, he was telling me, how to part my hair, what color nail polish to use, what clothes to wear. He was going shopping with me and picking out my clothes. I worked. I've always worked. I worked since I was 15. But he would use my money to pay for our dates and his gas and whatever. But I was such a people pleaser. I had such a problem saying no. I could not say no ever. But the church was really important to me, and we get all these lessons about keeping yourself clean and worthy and chastity, and bishop interviews, since I was 12, and they would ask if you ever masturbated, and if you had a problem with masturbation, I don't even know what that word meant.
Right.
But I could tell from the tone it was something to say no to. But I wasn't really sure what that word meant. It was a little iffy. But I didn't ask because that would seem to be embarrassing. Anyway, I did end up, making out quite a bit with my boyfriend. We graduated high school and spent that summer after high school together, and we ended up having sex and then confessing to the bishop about it. And we told not to take the sacrament for a couple weeks. And he wound up putting his mission papers in, even though we really struggled with this. And he got called on his mission, and he went through the temple. And even after he went through the temple, he basically came, attacked me one night and forced himself on me. It just, he couldn't help it. I mean, he was just, anyway.
Yeah.
But he went into the MTC, and in the MTC, he got, the high pressure in there. You got to repent of everything. You're gonna, and he was just breaking down, and he was calling me and saying, it's so awful. I can't do this. And when he left on his mission, it was such a huge relief to me.
Sure.
I was sad that he was going, but then also it's like this fog lifted and my life cleared up. Everything became brighter. Yeah. And I was ready for that relationship to be over. I had promised him all these things, but I didn't mean them. And I just wanted him to stay out there. So while he was on his mission, I worked at a radio station. And I was the DJ in the evenings and the weekends. And my husband, now my ex-husband, I didn't know who he was at the time. He and his partner had a video store, and they started advertising and on the radio, and they started doing this little top 10 countdown. It was just a little AM station in this little hick town in Utah. And so that's how I met him. He started coming into the station to record their show, and I would produce it, do all the tech work and everything for it. And that's how I met him. And he was just coming out of a relationship. And so we started dating. We met in April. I was 19, and he proposed to me on my birthday in July for my 20th birthday, and we got married in August.
Wow.
And
so no, was he a member of the church?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And he has he had a rough childhood. And he didn't grow up terribly active in the church, but his parents were divorced, so he had two families
Yeah.
that he was juggling back and forth. And so one lived in California and one lived in this town in Utah. But he would come to Utah all the time to visit his dad. And there was a kind of a bishop at the time in Utah that kind of took him under his wing, and he got him out on a mission. And so ever since then, I mean, my husband was very strong in the church. He got, activated at mission age, and that was it. He was very, very strong in his belief and his testimony. And it came at a good time for him, and it saved him.
Yeah. It sounds like it.
Yeah. Turned his life around. And so, yeah, we got married in the Salt Lake Temple. We were married. Our officiant was Thomas S. Monson.
Wow. Who? And if we have listeners that are not familiar with Mormon culture and religion, Thomas S. Monson would go on to become the prophet of the church later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was
deal.
He was either in the first presidency or the very least in the Quorum of the 12. And a few years later he became the prophet.
Yeah.
But a lot of them had houses in this little town where I lived, and a lot of the general authorities. And so he knew my husband would paint his fence. And so when we were engaged, my husband's like, "Hey, will you marry us?" And he's like, "Sure." And at that time, I don't think he was supposed to be marrying people, but because we had this connection, and he knew him by, on first name basis, he knew him by sight. So he was our officiator. And so that was kind of cool.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Anyway, we had this, we had a really good life and 4 kids. And I went on through my life, but I feel like ever since that first minute of disassociating when I was 7 years old, and ever since I first pushed all of that down in, it was there. I thought it was pushed away, it was gone, but it wasn't. It was living in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I was such a people pleaser and I wanted to be everything for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
My dad even told me in high school, he said, when he was talking to me about dating, that it's up to the girl to make sure things don't go too far. He said the boys are incapable of putting on the brakes.
Yeah.
And
that's a message a lot of us got growing up.
And what's wrong with that message? Because the boys are capable of putting on the brakes.
Mm-hmm.
But they are taught, and we are taught that they are not. Well, and so why would they?
Right. And it makes it so hard, because then as girls, we not only have the weight of the responsibility for our own behaviors, but now we've got the weight of the responsibility for their behaviors, when really we can't control their behaviors. But, it goes along with kind of the teachings about not showing your shoulders and things like that, because it's tempting for them. And like you say, then they won't be able to put the brakes on. Right.
Because, shoulders are such a sexual object, and heaven forbid that they see a shoulder and get a hard on. And then once they get a hard on, well, they have to do something with it.
Exactly. So now it's your fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're getting taught the same message.
Right.
The girls have to dress a certain way or else they're going to get these feelings.
Right.
And that's really toxic and messed up.
Mm-hmm. For both the girls and the boys. It's messed up for everybody. Yeah.
And that was reinforced to me. Like my boyfriend had said, "Well, how come you didn't, like, after we were well into our relationship, it's like, how come you didn't push me away? Or how come you didn't try harder to push me away?" Because I did at first, because that's what a girl does. Oh, they put their hand up, they have to try, and then you push it away, and then they have to try anyway, and then you like do this dance. And I was wondering to myself, well, could I have? Was that? I wasn't in charge of that, But I just remember that moment. And then even when I was engaged, and I did tell my soon-to-be husband that I felt I had this big weight on my shoulders, like I needed to tell him that I had had sex with somebody. Mm-hmm. And so I was crying, and I could barely get it out. And I finally said that, I had sex before. And he just went, oh, no wonder. I went, huh? No wonder what? I said, what? What do you mean, no wonder? He's like, never mind. And I think he was just saying that because even with him with making out, I didn't make him stop. As far as he wanted to go was probably as far as I would go,
Yeah.
If he stopped, then I stopped. I mean, I didn't push him anywhere. And he was waiting for me to stop him.
Yeah. Right. If you don't stop me, then I'm going to make the assumption that it's okay, not really getting explicit consent, but you didn't say no, so therefore that made it okay.
Yeah. And why?
Yeah.
It's so wrong to place that on the girls.
Mm-hmm.
The boys need to be taught about consent.
Yes.
They need to be taught about safety and consent. And that's my
Yes.
big thing is, and they are definitely in control of themselves. They can choose.
Right.
Just because they have a hard on or something doesn't mean that they have to somehow let that be fulfilled in whatever way it takes.
Exactly.
It's just so ridiculous.
Well, and two, by not teaching them about consent, we're actually insulting them, because we're by saying you don't have any control over your own feelings, that's kind of an insult to their intelligence as well.
Absolutely.
Of course you can control that. Of course you can. Yeah.
Right. We all are in charge of our own selves.
Exactly.
We should feel like we have that autonomy. I never felt like I had autonomy. But so in my marriage, and I didn't even so I haven't admitted any about my child sexual abuse to anybody at this point, to nobody, not to my best friends, not to my parents. I was married several years and had a couple of kids before I even mentioned it to my husband. And I think it was maybe 1 or 2 lines.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know what to do with that. He wasn't.
Right. Yeah.
He didn't know what to do with that. I think he just kind of like, wow, that sucked. I mean.
Yeah.
And then we never spoke of it again.
Right.
Ever. So I thought I could not ever speak of it. And I thought I didn't know. I didn't know that how the way that I was shaped from a very young age would have such an influence on my relationships as an adult.
Right.
And so I gave up a lot of my own autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was losing myself. When you're a people pleaser to the nth degree, you give and give and give until you lose yourself and you don't know who you are. And you get burnt out. And I was doing that professionally. My work, I overwork and get underpaid, and because but you got to be the stories I could tell you. Anyway, so now I'm going to move up to 2019, and my mother got sick, and she'd been struggling a little bit with dementia. She wasn't like so far gone, but she had some dementia, and she'd had some cancer, but she got really sick in August of 2019, on August 1st, and I'll just real quick say, they thought she had a scratch on her cornea from putting on her makeup because she's really shaky, but turned out that was a misdiagnosis. By the time they figured out what it was, which it was shingles, and it was behind her eye. My. And so since it was behind her eye, by the time they figured out what it was, it had turned to meningitis and gone to her brain.
Oh my heavens.
And there wasn't, it was just too advanced. And so she died on my birthday. Not my birthday.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
She died on my anniversary. My 37th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And it was basically 22 days later, after she got this eye problem. But I was with her a lot in the hospital, me and my brothers and, all of us. because I had 3 younger brothers too, who I just loved dearly.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel like I helped raise them.
Sure.
Because by the time they came along, I was like 12,
Mm-hmm.
But when she died, I knew she was going to die. I was ready for that. I'm a very highly organized person. I try to control everything around me, and I thought I was prepared, but it ripped me open. How I put it is, it cracked me open, and everything that had been inside me my whole entire life, what was shoved down, came to the surface all at once in a big black mess of tar. And I went into a deep, deep grief. I was drowning for those first few months, just drowning. I couldn't stop crying. I'm not a crier. I haven't cried like my whole life. I think a lot of that has to do with disassociating, disconnecting. And, but all of a sudden I couldn't stop crying. And before she died, I had gone kind of inactive from the church for a number of years. It wasn't anything any of us spoke about. I didn't address why, even really to myself, other than I knew I couldn't get out of bed on Sundays anymore. I had lots of callings, a lot of leadership callings, a lot of I was 10 years in the primary presidency. I was 5 years as president. I was stake primary presidency, and then I was in relief study presidencies. And I mean, I just gave, and I got burnout. And I couldn't get myself to church. I couldn't do it. My husband would rip the blankets off and try to drag me out of bed, turn the light on, and I couldn't do it. We couldn't seem to communicate about it. I don't think he was interested in hearing why. He just wanted me there. And I didn't know why, other than I had this massive cognitive dissonance when I was there, which now I know that. I didn't know that then, but now I know the name of it, cognitive dissonance, when you know that something is not right, but you're having to live like it is right. And you're looking around and you're like, I am crazy. This is crazy. But I have to keep going. Anyway, I couldn't. It wasn't, I just could not keep going. And I had a daughter out on a mission.
Wow.
And she came home, and my youngest son went out right after her. Two missions of my kids I spent in bed on Sundays. And but it was this big secret that I knew I could never tell my parents. So once my mom died, I knew I wasn't going to break her heart anymore by admitting that I was no longer a believing member of the church, because I knew that would break her heart. And also with her dementia, she just would repeat things over and over. And I would hear one of my other brothers left the church. Well, he admitted to leaving the church before this, and all I would hear about is, oh, I wish he would just get his life. I wish he would. I can't believe he left. He had the strongest testimony. He was our Nephi. He was, he was holding the family together. He was the most spiritual one. I can't believe he left. And it was just a broken record. Oh, we got to get him back. And I didn't want that to be me.
Right.
And so I didn't say anything, which was kind of chicken of me, to let my brother take the heat like that. And I love him dearly. But
yeah,
once she died, then that was in August. And that December, I decided to tell my husband that I did not believe in the church anymore. And I didn't think it would come too much of a shock, because it'd been basically 7 years since I'd gone to church. I'd go every now and then, especially if somebody was giving a talk or, welcome homes, farewells, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But he took it very, very hard. He took it extremely hard. And he wouldn't talk to me about it for several months. I mean, other than trying to preach to me, give me lessons. Like, I grew up with it. I knew. I knew all the things about love and not love, about prayer and scripture reading. And, you know, I've had depression, obviously, off and on over the years, some years worse than others. I was in a huge depression at that moment. And the church wants to be able to cure depression with prayer and scripture study.
Right.
And they teach in a way that insinuates if you're not doing the big, like 5 things, prayer, scripture study, family home evening, church attendance, tithing, then yeah, you can expect your life to be crap. You know,
Right.
of course it's going to be
Right.
crap because you're not doing those things.
Yeah. It's kind of the answer to everything.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like if someone is diabetic, they can read the whole Book of Mormon and Bible. It's not going to cure their diabetes.
Right.
You can't pray away shit like that.
Right.
And I wasn't being punished for my lack of faith. I mean, it was just
Right.
bad thing. So in the church, if something bad happens to a good person, they're like, oh, that's their trial. But if something bad happens to a person they think is a bad person, then that's a punishment.
Right.
And if something good happens to a good person, they're like, see, you're living the gospel. Those are blessings.
It's a blessing.
If something good happens to a bad person, then it's like, well, you know, that's just Satan and it's going to come around and they're going to be sad in the long run. They're not even really happy anyway. I don't know. It's just this convoluted way of thinking.
Right. Yeah, they're not truly happy, or they only think they're happy, but they're not as happy as they could be. And yeah,
they just want to just act like they live in
well,
everybody's brain and they know what they're feeling.
But I think if you think about it, they sort of have to think that way because of that. You said it already, the cognitive dissonance. They sort of have to say that because to believe otherwise would mean you have to acknowledge that cognitive dissonance is real, and it would kind of disrupt that paradigm of thinking, right?
It does. And therefore,
Yeah.
I mean, a faith crisis is really that. It can be, for a lot of people, it can be a huge crisis and a traumatic event. Their whole world.
Yes. Turns everything upside down, inside out, and every which way, and scrambles it up.
Yeah.
And spits it back out until it's something you don't even recognize. Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of have to pick up the pieces and try to figure out what's real and true and what's not. And
they call it the dark night of the soul for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you know, I've been struggling in my sex life. At the beginning, we had so much sex. I mean, 7 days a week, twice on Sundays. I mean, it was like, it was my job and I was doing it. But you know, motherhood comes and children and postpartum and nursing and so you have sex when you don't want to, and time after time after time, and my body, you know, being taken, especially after having babies, it was so climbed on and sucked on.
Yes.
And you know, it
yes,
the blood and the milk and I mean, it's just all, it's just a whole mess.
Yeah.
And then here's your, you know, your significant other pawing at you because they have needs. And so we would go, and that's the thing, is like, I can remember several lessons, like in church, like in Sunday school, they would do a combined meeting of the adults the married people.
Yeah.
And they'd get the chalkboard in there and they'd go, his needs, her needs. His needs, and number one is always sex.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're taught. The man needs sex. The man needs sex. The man needs sex. Everything in my life was about giving my body to someone else. Like my body was never mine from the beginning.
Yeah. I was actually going to say that. Yeah, you said it. Your body is not even your own. at first it belonged to your husband, and then you bring children into the picture, and now it belongs to them and your husband, and it just doesn't belong to you at all.
No, and it hadn't since I was 7 years old. It always belonged to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I had the power over that part of my life, and that if I said no, then what's he supposed to do? That's his need, right?
Right. Well, and then also we're taught if you don't satisfy that need, he's going to go get it somewhere else.
Right.
Because it's this need. So then you're also responsible for his cheating if he cheats on you because, well, you didn't give him enough sex. And so he had to go get it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
It's very convoluted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I had friends, super judgy friends who'd be like, well, if his wife doesn't give him blowjobs, then what does she expect?
Right.
I mean, they would say
He's gonna
these
go get it
things.
somewhere else.
They would
Yeah.
say these things, and it would be
Mhm.
perfectly logical to them
Right.
that was a reasonable expectation.
Well, and you said something about, you just said something, from the time you were 7 years old that I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm saying this wrong. But you said I didn't feel like I even had the power to say anything about this. And that's because quite literally you didn't. You had never been taught, never, from the time you were little. Nobody ever stopped and said, Denise, your body is yours. And when somebody touches it, you have the right to say no. You have the right to have autonomy over your body. Like none of us were ever given that message. And so it's absolutely logical when you've said it more than once in this discussion that you didn't feel like you had the power to say no.
Right. And even if they would say those things, to me, it was like they said, like, stranger danger or whatever, you can say no. It was always, to me, it felt like wink, wink, accept.
Yes.
And because I knew that the things weren't always on the up and up with the gospel. I'm a big reader. I'm a voracious reader. And it was an escape for me when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandparents had given us this big box of books of all the classics, the Huck Finn and all of them, all of them. And I just went through all of them, and we had those Reader Digest condensed books. Read all of them. I just read.
I loved those.
Yeah, I read everything I could get my hands on, and I was reading.
Same.
It was in the 70s when we lived in California, and I was reading the Guinness Book of World Records.
Oh yeah, I loved that book.
And I came to the part where it said the most wives. And it had Joseph Smith and Brigham Young.
Oh boy.
And I'm like,
in the 70s.
Yeah. And I'm like,
yeah.
Joseph Smith? No. Because I was taught it was Brigham Young that did the Pogamy. It was Brigham Young, and it was because of the widows and the crossing the plains and the yada, yada, yada. But here I'm looking at this Guinness Book of World Records, and I'm like, they got the number of wives, they've got names, they've got, I know they researched this stuff. And so I suspected that the Guinness Book of World Records got it right. But for some reason, the church had a different narrative. Mm-hmm. And so I always had that going on in my brain. You say one thing, but you're doing another. Or you're putting on this show, you're doing this thing, but there's all this other stuff that's, I don't know. I knew that there was some things in the church that weren't quite right, but I also feel like it's very much a show for other people.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, we'd see these other families in the Word, and they seemed like they were everything. They had all of the matching the dresses, and they all sat, and they all had the perfect hair, and they all seemed so happy. But then you go visit them, and behind doors, I mean, they're effed up.
Right.
And I saw that time and time again. And so my little worldview was things aren't always truthful, but this is how you act and this is what you say. And so I think that all led to part of this this whole cognitive dissonance thing that just finally broke me.
Yeah.
Um, so I admitted that I was out of the church in that December. We didn't basically talk about it for pretty much that whole year, or at least the first. You lose track of time.
Did you say this was December of 2019?
Yes, when I told my husband I was out.
Okay, because that's right when COVID hit too. So
Yes.
that's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we were relieved that my mom didn't have to face that.
Yeah.
And my daughter got married during 2020. And
Oh, okay.
but at that time, the church came out with a new rule that you could get married outside of the temple and still get sealed in the temple. Before,
Oh, that's right.
if you got married, even if you're active and you're both virgins or whatever, and you got married outside of the temple, they would still make you wait a year because they
Right.
wanted to stress the importance of temple marriage from the get-go.
Yeah.
But they had changed this rule, so which was thrilling for my daughter because then she knew that she could have a traditional wedding and I could be a part of it, and then they can do their sealing whenever, and I wouldn't be a part of that.
Yeah.
She's a returned missionary. She knew I wasn't active, and they knew when I had told my husband I had left the church, and so it's very respectful. And my kids are just amazing. They're loving and beautiful.
That's awesome.
And just as a side note, her reception did get canceled because of COVID, like a week before.
Oh, yeah.
So
many losses during COVID.
It was a crazy time. In my mind, that whole year is a black hole.
It really is. My own child lost out on high school graduation.
Yeah.
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 It was just a weird time.
Mm-hmm.
And that summer, was so, the whole George Floyd stuff was going on, and it was a really, really big traumatic year for America.
It really was.
I don't think we're ever going to recover from it.
I have to agree. I hope that we will. I hope that it will open some eyes and open some new ways of thinking. But
it will, but it's going to take a couple generations.
Yeah, I was going to say, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Yeah.
My husband and I, we tried marriage counseling for a while. But it just became evident that it wasn't going to work. I wouldn't really ever have autonomy. I don't know that he would ever. He wanted to choose me instead of the church. It's not like he chose the church over me. He wanted to choose me. He just didn't know what that meant or what that looked like, or we couldn't figure that out. And by then, we'd had so much distance in our marriage. We had grown apart. All those years I didn't go to church and we didn't communicate. We weren't communicating very well about our sex life. And like there were times when I would be, when I was nursing babies, and I would look on the internet, is there some kind of an herb that I can order for him to take away his sex drive so that I wouldn't have to feel guilty? Because I didn't like to ever say no, but then I would feel guilty if I did, and I couldn't live with that. And then it was making me resentful. And you just do that for so long. And honestly, I don't know how you can recover from that.
Right. Well, and then you add on to that this history of child sexual abuse that you had never really processed, or I mean, you had said, I just thought I could swallow that down and it would we don't have to think about that. We don't have to go, that can go away. That also plays a factor in things too.
Yes. So we wound up getting divorced. And so it hasn't been quite a year. We separated on my birthday in July of 2021, and we were divorced by November. So here I am. There were just a few more triggers that got me to this point of where I'm finally talking about it. besides my mother's death, which was the hugest. That was the huge catalyst to. That was the most life-changing thing for me, because it
Mm-hmm.
opened up all of this, and I couldn't put it back in. It's like the stuffing came out, and I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
put it back in.
Yeah.
I couldn't get my life to make sense anymore, and I started. And for a while after my divorce, I was good. I felt lighter. I felt energized. I felt like I had my autonomy back. But then my mental health started declining again, and I was getting worse and worse. And I was knowing that I had to deal with this trauma from my childhood, and I didn't know how to get to that. But I did finally bring it up in therapy. So I told my therapist, and she was the first person I'd really told the whole story to.
Wow.
Here I am at, 39 years old, 38, and finally, not 38, 58, and telling my story for the first time. I also admitted to my very best friend of 30 years that that had happened in my past, but I just kind of brought it up, and she didn't ask any questions, and we just kind of moved past it. Like I felt like I had to just say. But then some more. I just got more and more fragile with my mental health, and my my best friend said some things. It was when Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Oh, so just recently.
Yeah. And she had said, there's no reason for anyone to ever get an abortion. And when she said that sentence, it was a huge trigger for me. I actually I had another mental health breakdown, and I've been having them, having other stressful things happen during these, getting my childhood home on the market, and emptying it of all the belongings. We put my dad is in a kind of an adult living condo now. I mean, all these different, so many traumatic things that happened between then. And then when she said that, physically, my body just went boing. And I started, my body was having these convulsions, and I would start shaking, and I couldn't stop, or I'd be twitching. I would have like if you can picture somebody with Tourette's syndrome, and they're constantly like moving something in their body. That was what was going on with my body. I was having a very physical reaction that I couldn't control. And I went into therapy the day after I had this breakdown. After, I mean, my friend, she didn't intend for it to be so harmful. We just had different views. She was adopted. I understand her view. For me, it's not about abortion. It's about autonomy.
Right, because it took you your entire life to get yours back.
It was a lifetime. And if Maya had gotten pregnant from my brother, to me, that would be a reason to maybe not carry that baby. That would be very traumatic, to have to give birth to my brother's baby.
Yes.
And for her to say there is no reason, there is no reason for anyone to ever get an abortion. My head took that, and I snapped. And and knowing that if I had gotten pregnant back then, I would have had to most definitely give birth to my brother's baby. I mean, that was the 70s. There wasn't a choice then.
Right. And not only would you have had to have given birth to that baby, but the shame that would have surrounded that whole experience. Like, back in that time, you probably would have been sent somewhere else to live until that baby was born because, it's a big secret, quiet thing. We don't, it's shameful. It's embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want anybody to know about this. And it just re-traumatizes you over and over. And then, like you say, to have to birth a baby that you never asked for, that was put in you against your will, and then to have to go through the motion of birthing it. And that creates its own set of hell too, because more than likely you also would have given that baby up for adoption if this had anything to do with church. And that's also a dichotomy in feelings, because although you don't want that baby, you didn't ask for that baby. It's traumatic to get pregnant, traumatic to birth it. There is also trauma in taking that baby and giving it to someone else as well.
Oh, of course. The whole thing is just
So
riddled with trauma.
It's just one big ball of trauma.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be, I mean, like I could have been 12,
Yeah. And I'm an obstetric nurse.
Mm-hmm.
I care for mothers who have given birth to babies. I have cared for 12 and 13-year-old girls. I have cared for young girls who have birthed babies conceived by their fathers. It's horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People think that that's a rarity, and I'm here to tell you it's not.
It is not.
Yeah.
Because we don't talk about it.
Because we don't talk about it. And I will die on this hill that we need to be able to be in charge of our own bodies and our own choices about our reproductive systems.
Mm-hmm. I'll die on that hill with you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so that actually destroyed that friendship. We haven't been able to speak since. So yeah, so that was another intimate relationship that I'd had. Probably, I mean, obviously I was in many ways better friends with her than I was my own husband.
Mm-hmm.
So
but it's another loss.
It was just like it was 30 years of the only person I could really talk to about everything under the sun. And so my body's deteriorating. It's going into these involuntary muscle movements, plus pinching. I couldn't stop pinching myself. It was like I was going through I don't know. I feel like I reverted to 7 years old and was going through it now. I was, this sounds so ridiculous in junior high, but I actually was doing some cutting and with a razor blade on different parts of my body. And I was experimenting. I was in just such a huge amount of pain. I didn't know what to do, how to make it stop. I couldn't live in my body. I was people don't understand that depression can turn to pain.
Yes,
depression and anxiety pain. Is pain. And I was forced to face all of this. And I was since my mother passed away, I mean, I've had lots and lots of suicidal ideation. It was the most intense during this period, which actually is just like last month.
I'm so sorry.
And I had a couple of different plans in place, and I was trying really hard. I've been paying so much money on therapy and different things, and trying to sign up for things that I felt like could help me. And I was at my breaking point where I thought I'm either going to die or like I have one last shot, and I'm either going to have to be an inpatient somewhere at a facility. But then I had heard about this ketamine treatment. And so I had a ketamine treatment, and I've had some ketamine treatments, and they have pulled me out of my suicidality. It's completely pulled me out of that.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
I have a long way to go still in my healing, because I'm working on it, but I'm working my ass off. And
Yeah.
but that gave me a little bit of a break, kind of a reset, kind of a reboot of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
These last few years, I've had this lump in my throat that won't go away, and especially this last year, and I felt the need to tell my story.
Yes.
And if I can get it out there and get my voice back,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to go a long way in helping me on this road to healing. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's ever a point where you reach, you can say, okay, I'm well.
Sure.
But I'm better than I was a few weeks ago, and I'm hoping in a few weeks I'll even be better than that. I will say that so it's been such a relief to not have that pressure for sex this past year. Like, I would be so low and down, and I'd come in my room and I'd be so grateful. I didn't have to say no to somebody that night. I didn't have to feel guilt for saying no, or I didn't have to say yes but not enjoy it or want to be there, because it's just a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
And I'd done that for so many years that it killed it. It's not my husband's fault.
Right.
It's not.
Yeah.
He was never equipped. He was never prepared. Emotional health is not part of our curriculum in the church. And the thing about Mormonism, it's a high demand religion. And so when you're fully in, it's in everything. It's in every waking moment. You usually have a calling, and you have ministering people, that you have to look after. And it's all about doing, the big 5 things, and then give. You give.
You sacrifice everything.
Yeah. Give to the little stream all day long. And they have these, women's conferences and things, and they try to, and I would go to those and try to get re-energized, but it just got harder and harder to push that rock up the hill. And it's a healthy place for many people, but not everyone. And agreed. I wish that the members could see that there are so many people that really are better off. Just admit it to yourself that they're better off not in the church. So I guess I would just like to, in wrapping this up, just kind of give my opinion of some of the after effects. This is why I want it to be addressed, and I want it to be acknowledged. I want people to talk about it, because to me, if I were to list off some of these after effects, even though you think, oh, it happened such a long time ago, there's no phrase I've come to hate worse than it's in the past. Leave the past in the past. Right. Because I don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I'm so sad today. I was abused when I was 7 years old. I was, Right. I don't do that. You don't think about it. But it shows up in your way. It shows up in your body in a certain way. And it has all these ripple effects that are from that, but you wouldn't necessarily, but I'm not dwelling on it. I've never dwelt on it.
Well, and for so long, you don't even know that A equals B. For so long, most of the time, we didn't even know that, oh, the reason I'm having all these issues here is a direct result of the things that happened to me back here.
Absolutely.
And it's until you make the connection, you can do the big 5 things. You can do all the things. You can even take medication, which is helpful for some people, and medication has its place. But until we make the connection and actually deal with that stuff, you're right. And I'm making an assumption here that you've heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. It's a book by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He is a world-renowned expert on trauma. And the title of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, it is so self-explanatory because the entire book is about that very thing. We can push all the emotions down. We can repress the memories. We can try to forget. Our bodies will never forget. Our bodies will always remember, and our bodies will react because they want to heal. And so that's when we start having the physical symptoms, because our bodies are finally like, hey, listen, if you're not going to deal with this crap, I'm going to start getting physical here because this is going to destroy you from the inside out. And that's when we get the chronic pain issues or
Gut.
any gut. Exactly. The gut and is so tied to trauma and emotions. Sometimes I think the gut's more tied to it than the brain is, at least tandem, hand in hand. It's a phenomenal book. It changed my life dramatically. It was so validating to understand when I read it, like, oh, this is why I react a certain way in certain situations, because I had this happen to me before. It's everything that you have described today. You're describing Dr. van der Kolk's work. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. People don't understand why this happens.
And it's not like you can't, leave the past in the past, look forward to the day, like pull yourself up with your bootstraps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Suck it up,
How?
buttercup. Yeah.
My body and my brain aren't cooperating, I can't. So to me, those are the lasting effects, the disassociation, the intimacy issues, that my body is there to be used. Even like I was always teased and tickled. Oh my gosh, we'd be tickled so much. I hate it. A guy that I worked with, I was telling me I was getting teased at school and by my friends, but they thought it'd be funny to put duct tape in my hair or put me in a locker or whatever. And he'd be like, Denise, you walk around with a sign around your neck that says abuse me. I'm like, what? How could he say that? How could he look at me? Is that really what he sees? Is that what everybody sees? That I walk around with a sign around my neck saying abuse me? I feel like that men have to have their needs met. It's who meets them isn't as important as having the need met.
Right.
That, if they need to do this thing, then you have to be there as the vessel for them to do it. And that's how it is. I think the effects of childhood sexual abuse is confusion about your body's responses, about this is against my will, but is my body responding? I don't know. Am I getting wet? What is that? Is it? And then it carries over into your adult sex life, like, okay, it's okay now for my body to respond, and if so, how? And where do you get that point where it becomes wrong? And I couldn't ever get past that point of where, for my own needs being met, it would be wrong, and it continued into my entire marriage. And and everything, in my opinion, the messages that we were taught in our religion it reinforces all of these beliefs. It doesn't contradict them. Men are not accountable or capable.
That's such a profound point you just made. That's a really profound point. You just said the messages that we get in church don't contradict those things. They reinforce them.
Yeah.
And that creates so much confusion in our bodies.
It does, because a lot of it is also subtle, but your body hears it. I was taught that.
Oh, yes, it does. 100%.
So yeah, men are not accountable or capable of controlling their sexual needs, that we need to put up and not complain about it. if you want to be, a good wife.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
if you turn down your husband, you're wrong, because
Mm-hmm.
it's their number one need and they can't help it.
Right.
And which is kind of infantilizing them, but
Again, we're insulting their intelligence, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so my therapist, I never really heard anybody put it this way before, but the whole big, recently in the news, this AP article was released about this bishop in Arizona who,
Yes.
this dad had admitted to sexually molesting his daughters. The bishop didn't report it to the authorities. There's a big, long
Mm-hmm.
part to the story, but it turned out that it kept happening for 7 years. Once the bishops, more than one bishop, found out about it, was never reported to the authorities.
Mm-hmm.
And so these little girls were even a few months old, were being sexually molested and abused, and it was put on the internet. And how they discovered it was like in New Zealand. These cops in New Zealand saw it, and they, contacted Homeland Security, and and the roads led back to this dude in Arizona. And so this has been in the news, and I was talking to my therapist about it, and because it's just bringing up all of this stuff. This is all happening. This is all getting me to this mental breakdown. And she pointed
Mm-hmm.
out that in the church, it's lumped in with the other sexual sins. So there's no sex and there's sex. No sex is good, and all these other things are the same. So basically, any sexual sin is in the same category as, like, maybe making out as a teenager, fornication. It's still the consequences are like the same. It's
right.
They're not, I don't know how to put it. They're not considering the victim. And
right.
They're thinking about that this man had some sort of a sexual sin, so maybe he needs to stop taking this sacrament. They don't go, look at this child that's been abused. What can we do to support her and help her? What can we do to support her and get her out of this situation? It's more, the focus is on this priesthood holder, this is going to ruin his life. And I'm it's not just this guy. I've seen it. It's widespread in the church. I have nephews that have been called out for being sexual predators, and basically nothing is done, and there's multiple victims, it is widespread, and people aren't talking about it. Even my mom was like, had told me one time when she had some uncle or neighbor or something that did something, and she's like, ugh, it's like it's part of life. Oh, oh, you too? Yeah, that happened.
Right.
And
like, oh, it's just so normal. We, it's so much bigger than us. We can't stop it, so we might as well just, I guess that's just how it is.
Yeah. It's like, too bad, that sucked. That sucked. It really wasn't fun. That must have been awful. And then that's it.
Yeah.
And there's no support. And I think it's time for that to be over. I think that we need to shine a light on it, and we need to spread the word, and we need to make sure that girls know that they do get to choose what happens to their body, and that their body is their own.
Absolutely. And also that girls need to understand, or any victim of abuse needs to understand, they do not own, they have no ownership in that there's no shame. They don't have any ownership. You're right. Every time someone speaks, we shine a light. Every time someone speaks, we make it okay for one more person who hears the story and says, oh, okay, that happened to me too. Maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe I've been blaming myself all this time when I really didn't have any part in it, because they were never taught and they were never protected.
Right. And they don't even know. I mean, when they're young, they don't know anything. They don't know that what sex is. They don't know about they're not, we were, especially back then, we were so uneducated. We didn't know anything about our bodies. And
Right.
everybody's too scared to talk about it. If you talk about it, then that will happen. That's their idea about sex education. If you talk about it, then that's going to make them want to have sex.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same with a lot of other topics too. If we talk about suicide, people are going to commit suicide. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
We have to talk about this so people know that there's hope and there's help available, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So something you said earlier about protecting the abuser, that it's not about the victim. One kind of theme that I've heard from other people who've I've either read their stories or heard them tell their stories. I've heard this more than once, that church authorities sometimes have said, we don't want to report to the authorities because if this person winds up in prison, they won't be able to get the spiritual help that they need. If they are on the outside, if we can keep this quote unquote in-house, then we can get them the spiritual help that they need, which completely discounts the victim in the whole situation.
100%. That's what I'm saying. It's all about the perpetrator. And that child is, be extra nice to her. She had a rough time last year,
Right.
In my mind, so learning about church history and learning about the roots of Mormonism, starting with the treasure hunting and with Joseph Smith and the polygamy, and Joseph Smith learning that he was married to other men's wives, polyamory. I mean, and this is not anti-Mormon. This is all on the church's website.
Right.
It's women have been treated as belongings and objects since the get-go. And the men have been in charge of the church for so long. They are so used to the patriarchy, and especially the top 15 they're old, and they don't understand. They have no way to comprehend. There's no way for them to comprehend what it is like from our point of view. They can't even comprehend that we would have a different point of view. And not allowing women in major leadership positions, I'm talking about having the priesthood. I think that's been a major disservice to the church, because I think that would have incorporated more empathy and compassion, less victim blaming. And if you think about the top leadership of the church, even though we're just now starting to learn that Joseph Smith had this history, they've always known. And they've known, and they've knowingly withheld it as long as possible. They have knowingly withheld it until they were forced to be open about it. So of course we're second-class citizens, because if they had cared, they would have addressed this from the beginning. It's literally written into our plan of salvation, and there's no way around it, that is what women are foreordained to do, is to birth babies for eternity and to be a multiple wife. And I know a lot of members of the church will say,
it's in D&C 132.
Yeah. and members of the church will say, well, I love the church, but I just don't believe in polygamy. I don't believe in that part of it. Well, then you don't believe in the church, because that is when you get down to the bottom line, to the very bottom line, it's women are going to have babies eternally, and the man is going to be the God. And they say we're goddesses, but we're just a means to an end.
Right.
We're just a means to an end. And
Right.
so, in a way, they're working a long con. It's a long con, because they know in their little heaven, which, I don't believe in, but in their Mormon heaven, they're going to have these multiple wives, and the wife's job is to have children, and that's that is our reason for existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to raise my hand and say, no, that's not good enough. That's not right, and that's toxic.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. I concur. Yeah. You're right. It's written right. It's D&C 132. It's the foundation of the entire gospel. It's referred to as the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. That's the basis of everything.
Yeah. I mean, if you, it is everything. If you don't wind up, if one of your, in Mormon heaven, if you, let's say your spouse doesn't live as quote unquote faithfully, then you're going to be assigned a different spouse. And the women that live faithfully, that maybe even never got married, they're going to be assigned a different spouse. They're going to be assigned to a man. We're objects in heaven.
I was going to say the autonomy, the lack of autonomy goes on in heaven as well. You will never fully be autonomous in the church as a woman.
No.
Yeah. Because in their plan of salvation, there has to be a priesthood holder to get you through everything. You cannot do it on your own. It is not possible in that paradigm under those set of rules.
No. And here's the thing is they peddle a cure, but what people don't realize is the reason why we need the cure is because of their treatment. They put us in a position, they want us to feel shame and sin, and like if we're disobedient even to the tiniest little thing, then the only way out of it is with this magical cure that only they can provide. And I just think that's a toxic system. So anyway, I guess that's my story. Yeah. I'm continuing on, and I think I'm over the worst of it, and I think being able to tell my story will be a big part of my healing process. And I'm just looking forward to moving forward and finding love and happiness with the relationships I have with children and friends. And
yeah. I don't know how much you know about or believe in the idea of chakras in the body, but when you talk about having this lump in your throat, the thing I keep thinking about is this throat chakra. And, we know that when we have traumas or physical ailments in our bodies, they can block those chakras. And one of the ways of healing that throat chakra is to take your voice back, is to speak your truth, is to allow that voice to come out. And I really hope beyond anything that by telling your story, that your body feels empowered to clear that throat chakra, and that lump in your throat is going to go away.
Thank you. I'm hoping so. I feel like that it's just one of many different areas where I've been forced to not use my voice. And so I'm learning. I'm trying. I'm trying to use my voice.
Yeah. I think it's so powerful. And every time, I know I said this before, I'm a broken record. I say it all the time. Every time someone speaks their truth, it gives someone else permission to do the same. Not that they need permission, but a lot of times people feel like they have to hear it come from someone else so that they can feel safe too. And so while we always say the purpose of this podcast is for survivors to tell their stories for their own healing, it really does create a community of healing for so many other people. I heal a little bit more every time somebody else is brave enough to tell their story. And I know other people too feel this way. We get messages from people that say, I thought I was the only one that went through this, or, oh my gosh, I resonated so much with that story. And now I'm starting to understand that what happened to me that I thought my whole life was just normal actually wasn't okay. And it answers so many questions, and I can start to heal and move on from things. So I'm wildly impressed with what you've been through and how it's affected you, but mostly what you're doing with it and the direction that you're going.
Well, it's so hard because you have this voice in your head going, why should you be able to speak up? You didn't have it as hard as somebody else, or everybody has a hard life. Like
Mm-hmm.
my husband had a traumatic childhood, but in different ways. It wasn't sexual abuse, but they had their own things, and everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
And how have I messed up my own kids' lives? But I'm not perfect. I've told lies. I've not always reacted the best way. But so it's really hard for me to feel like it's okay to say these things, because in my mind, you can't say them unless you're perfect. And that, of course, then nobody would be able to speak because none of us are perfect. But it's really hard to not compare traumas. And
oh yeah,
yeah, I just feel like
I think
that's what makes it hard.
I think that's such a common response. It was my own response when I told my own story. I said that I didn't tell my own story for the longest time because that was my thought was, well, my traumas aren't as traumatic as other people's. My traumas aren't as bad. So many other people have had it so much worse than I did. And so I honestly didn't believe I had the right to, I guess telling my story might seem like complaining about it. I put that in air quotes. Even when I was experiencing some of my own issues, previously before I'd started to deal with them, I didn't think I had the right to seek help. I didn't think I had the right to ask for anything. This is part of endure to the end. Just suck it up, buttercup, do the big five, like you talked about, and just kind of get over yourself. And I remember being so affected by a talk that Jeffrey Holland gave about mental health in general conference, and just feeling like I should be able to do more to get these feelings to go away. And it's just so hard, but we just need to keep giving people permission to speak, because there is something incredibly cathartic and healing about letting that come out. And one of my co-hosts, Kendra, she says this all the time, and I say it so many times in so many interviews. She is correct. There is something incredibly powerful about going back and hearing yourself tell your own story in your own voice. I don't know how much you know about inner child work, but for me, it really played into that, because it's like you're going back and you're validating everything that little girl went through. You're validating that wasn't her fault. She had no shame or responsibility to hold in any of it, that things were effed up for her because of things that were done to her. And really, by saying that out loud in your own voice, you're validating and putting your arms around that little girl and and loving on her, which she needed. You're giving her the love and protection now that she didn't get back then. And it's healing. It's really healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a journey, huh?
Yeah. It's a journey, and you said earlier too, you're right. I don't think there's ever going to come a time where I'm going to say, oh, I'm magically healed.
Mm-hmm.
Things are much better than they were before, but I, like a lot of or maybe everybody else, I still have bad days where I'm in the slumps with things too. And sometimes it's hard to get out of those little places, but you're right. It's absolutely a journey. I think it's going to be a journey for the rest of my life. I'm okay with that because the more we work on it, the more tools we have in our back pocket to deal with them. And it gets just a little bit easier to face some of that stuff when you have the tools to do it. And you've learned how to sit with all your feelings instead of going to the default that we'd been through our whole lives, which is shove, 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 bury, bury, bury. Once we really can allow ourselves to open up and sit with our own feelings, it does get a lot easier to sort of work through these things. And like you said, fostering relationships with like-minded people, fostering relationships with people who see you and accept you for exactly who you are, exactly the way you are, not feeling the need to change you. It's very empowering, very healing.
I just want to say one more thing. I had thought of this analogy when I was in therapy, and around sexual problems. It's the woman's job to her. The only way a man's needs are met is through a woman's body. That's the only way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're taught in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been giving my body since I was very, very little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to a point where I was so over it. And I had lots and lots of enjoyable sexual experiences. Don't get me wrong. It's like I said, we were married 38 years. We've been to some places. But it's like, to me, it was like, it's like you're asking someone to, like, it gets to a point where you're asking someone to, like, take this poison. Like, I know this is going to kind of make you a little sick or be diarrhea or whatever, but it's my need. So you're going to have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So, too bad, so sad.
Right.
Next day, I'm sorry, you're going to have to take this poison again, but it's my need. So,
yeah,
I have no control. What am I supposed to do?
Right. I need you to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, then the next day, you take this poison again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it was getting to be like for me. So it's getting to be very, very, very unhealthy. And it was a cycle that I couldn't figure out my way out of.
Yeah.
I still haven't figured my way out of that one yet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that whole death by 1,000 cuts, It's just one little paper cut today and another paper cut tomorrow and another paper cut the next day. And the next thing you know, you've got so many cuts, you're bleeding out.
Yeah. And it's from giving of my body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of which, just really quickly, I'm going to look at this here. I don't know if you know who Mindy Gledhill is.
Oh, I do. I love her.
Yeah, I love Mindy Gledhill too. I loved her when all of us were back in the church. I love her even more now. Mm-hmm. She's amazing. She posted something I just looked up because it's so profound, and I reposted it on my own social media account. But it goes along with what kind of half of everything you've been saying today. And this quote that she said was, "Perhaps the grandest theft is when an institution takes something that already belongs to you, your soul, makes you think it's not yours, and then sells it back to you for a price."
Yeah.
And we're still paying the price. That's the problem. We're still paying the price.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to be paying the price for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In the name of cheese and rice.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Something else I just wanted to throw out there. I don't know if you meant to use the word polyamory or if you meant polygamy, but I just wanted to throw it out there so that, because we might have listeners that might get kind of mad at us if we don't clarify it. There are a lot of people out there that do practice ethical polyamory, which is okay when everybody is a consenting adult and everyone's in that relationship as consenting adults and they're all communicating together. What Joseph Smith and Brigham Young practiced was actually not polyamory because there was no consent on the part of the people that they were involved in. And so I just don't want listeners to be upset about that because consent is a big deal. Consent is a really big deal.
No, I agree 100%. So this is how I feel about it. Polygamy, polyamory, in and of themselves, they're not an issue as long as all parties involved are of age.
Yes.
And they have informed consent.
Yes.
Which means completely informed.
Right.
It doesn't mean they find out later on that something wasn't on the up and up.
Right.
They have to have an understanding of the situation. What men and women do, grown-ass adults,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they have consent and informed consent,
Yep.
and they're of age,
Mm-hmm.
have at it.
Yeah. That's how I see it too.
I fully support it, and I would vote to support that. It's just when, for instance, in the FLDS community, that polygamy, it's used to keep women down in a system of oppression, and they're treated as objects. So that's when it becomes toxic, and also obviously the anything underage.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't consider, even those women say, yes, I do, I don't consider that informed consent.
Not at all.
Because they're not shown the whole picture.
No, that's not actually consent. That is,
they're spiritually abused.
Yes.
Is what
they're holding their, I mean, I put it in air quotes because I don't believe in it anymore, but they're holding their eternal salvation over this. This is relationship by threat. This is, and then they make you believe that you're consenting, but you're not. That's not consent. That is not the definition of consent.
It's spiritual manipulation.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. My issue is back in early days of the church, that my issue with it is that it was kept hush hush.
Uh-huh.
It was denied for decades. Now they're trying to say, no, we never denied it. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's bullshit.
Right.
That's gaslighting.
Yeah.
Because I lived it. My parents were all in. They were all in. They were John Birch Society. I mean, they were everything. I know what was taught.
Same.
And so don't give me that. And because that's what I blame them for, is lies of omission,
Mm-hmm.
outright lies,
Mm-hmm.
whitewashing,
Oh, yeah.
denials,
Mm-hmm.
and zero apologies.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that part's really hard too, because even when they come out and admit, hey, well, they won't say we got it wrong. They'll frame it as new revelation, but there is no apology. There's no true restitution. Yeah, and that makes it really hard. I agree with you. I'm a little bit younger than you, but not much. And I grew up the same way. None of this was ever taught. I tell people all the time, I don't really think the church was quite counting on the power of the internet, because once the internet took over, they sort of can't hide things anymore. And so they have to backtrack, and truthfully, if you think about it, they're in a no-win situation, because if they admit that they did these things, then it's going to make them look guilty to their members. And if they don't admit that they did these things, then it's going to just make them look like liars, and they're going to lose people either way. So,
Yeah. And they're kind of almost at a tipping point right there. They're either going to lose the younger generation or the older generation.
exactly.
And I think now they're willing to let go of the older generation, because there's still going to be, even out of those people, they're going to be still believe no matter what.
Right.
That are going to completely shut their eyes to anything negative about the church.
Yeah.
But they want to keep the younger ones coming in because that's where the money is.
Right.
That's,
Right.
those people, that's where any growth is. And they're noticing that this generation coming up isn't having it.
Oh, yeah. I say that all the time. Like, I always say this younger generation, I believe, is going to save everything because they don't stand for bullshit. They're very inclusive. They don't stand for injustice. They don't stand for a lot of these things. They're very compassionate. And they're calling out the older generation for these old, boxed in, racial, prejudicial, misogynistic, homophobic belief systems. And they're calling them what they are. They're not allowing people to hide behind, well, this is God's law and we just don't understand it. They're like, no, you don't get away with that anymore. It's causing harm. It's causing widespread harm. And I think you're right as far as, letting go of the older generation. And I have older people in my own circle. I've heard them say, when confronted with certain things, they will say, yeah, well, it's in my blood. I've been raised in it. I go back 7 generations to the pioneer times, and it's just in my blood. So it's just how it is. It's just, you're right. They're never going to open their eyes. And truthfully, it's painful. It is incredibly painful to open your eyes and see these things and admit them. I say all the time, I don't think we can heal from this stuff unless we're willing to see it, own it, and then sit in the discomfort of, oh my gosh, this is not okay. And I belonged to a system that kind of perpetrated some of this stuff for so long. And so, I say to people all the time, I have a lot of compassion for people that are in the church because
I do too.
I was one of those people. I get it. Mm-hmm. When you are taught something your entire life, it takes a massive shift for you to see it otherwise. It just does. And there are some people that unfortunately are never going to see it. And so I do have a lot of compassion for people.
Yeah. And I just love the member. In my mind, the members they just want nothing but the best for everybody.
Yeah.
They're just good, loving, warm-hearted fun. I'm going to a trick or trunking this weekend. It's going to be, I have no problem. I mean, there's some, obviously I'm aware of, plenty of bigoted people, but
yeah.
By and large, the lay members of the church are just good, and they just don't know. They just don't know.
Exactly. You don't know what you don't know.
And I think the system works really well for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Especially if you are, you don't have any kind of neurodivergence at all.
Right. No, and you're not queer or don't have queer kids.
Exactly. And you never will.
Or you're like white.
Right, white, middle class.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's who it works for.
Right.
Let's face it.
Right. And the truth is, it does provide a sense of community for a lot of people.
Absolutely, and that's the hardest thing because now I'm out on my own, and I don't regret it.
Right.
But honestly, one of the hardest parts about being real with people is I don't want them to say, "See, you're into this depression and you were suicidal because you left the church."
Yes.
And that's kept me quiet for a long time. Mm-hmm. But that's not the reason why.
Right.
That is not. It has nothing to do with it. And I am 1,000% happier, and I love people 1,000% more, and genuinely.
I say that all the time now. Yeah. You see people for who they really are now.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't leave the church because of these historical problems. I wasn't aware of them until I left the church.
Yeah.
I left the church because of how the LGBTQ community was being treated, Prop 8, and all of that. That started my cognitive dissonance. And then I left for social reasons, but I stayed out because of all of it is, um, I see it as a system, a harmful system.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yep. I concur. I agree. But everybody's got to come to that conclusion on their own and in their own space and time.
Yeah.
You can't. And I say all the time, my goal is never, ever. I don't aim to drag anybody out of the church. I don't aim to do any of that. If it's working for you, that's awesome. All power to you. Run with it. But I will be a safe space for anybody that wants to leave or needs somebody to talk to. You can come and talk to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Love it.
Well, I'm glad that you are on a pathway of reclaiming yourself, all the parts of yourself, your autonomy, your soul, your sexuality, whatever it is, that you're just reclaiming all of you. And I think, I hope the more that you embrace that and do that, you're just going to keep healing and things are going to get better and better. Yeah.
Thank you. That was just the main thing that I could hope for, is if someone would just address this sooner than when they're almost 60.
Right. Yeah. We have so many people that come on that are 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s even, that are, yeah, it's like, man, what lives could we have lived if we had addressed this so much sooner? And I don't live in a place of regret, but there is that thought that runs in the back of your head. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your vulnerability. I do. You have no idea how many other people you will affect by telling your story, but most of all, yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on Latter-day Survivors. You can find us on the web at latterdaysurvivors.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Latter-day Survivors, and we're on Twitter at LD Survivors. As survivors of trauma and abuse, we wanted to provide a platform for survivors to share their stories. Many survivors of all types of abuse may be able to recognize and relate to the patterns of behavior in the victims, abusers, families, and friends of the stories shared by other survivors on this podcast. Often, as we escape oppressive family, religious, and social constructs to a safer place where we come to see our abuse and all related issues, we are better able to process and begin to heal. We believe that when we share our stories with others, we can also help them to heal. It can take decades for survivors to find the courage to speak about these things. If it is so hard for adults, imagine how difficult it is for a child to speak up. We hope to normalize these discussions so that children can speak to adults earlier. As adults, we must listen and recognize the severity of the abuse, its potential consequences, and the need for action to stop the abuse as early as possible. Just knowing we are not alone, that there are other people who have felt and do feel the same or have endured similar experiences in life, can remind us that we are not alone in this.
Oh my child, I know you're hurt and you can't let go. It's not your fault and you don't deserve all the bad and the hurt. I know you tried so hard. I know you've done your part. It's not fair. You did your time. How much longer will you suffer in this life? But don't give up. Just hold on tight. It'll be alright. All your life you've tried to be a good man inside. Did everything that you thought you should. Didn't seem to do you any good. It's not fair. You did your time. How much longer will you suffer in this life?